Sarah Martinez stepped out of her pickup truck into the cool evening air of Pine Ridge, Colorado. The small mountain town looked peaceful enough, with its row of weathered storefronts and the distant peaks catching the last rays of sunset. She stretched her shoulders, feeling the familiar ache from the long drive from Fort Carson. After 3 tours in Afghanistan and countless training exercises, the 28-year-old Army Ranger was finally taking her first real vacation in 5 years. She grabbed her duffel bag from the truck bed and walked toward the Pineview Inn, a modest 2-story building with a hand-painted sign that had seen better days. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and an elderly man behind the counter looked up from his newspaper with a welcoming smile. "You must be Miss Martinez," he said, standing up slowly. "I'm Henry Caldwell, the owner. Welcome to Pine Ridge." Sarah shook his weathered hand, noting the firm grip and the way his eyes briefly assessed her. Former military, she guessed. There was something about the way veterans carried themselves that never quite went away. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. I'm looking forward to a quiet week here." Henry chuckled as he handed her the room key. "Well, you picked the right place for quiet. Not much excitement around here, except for the occasional bear wandering through town. Your room is upstairs, second door on the right. There's a decent diner across the street if you're hungry, and the hiking trails start just behind the inn." Sarah thanked him and made her way upstairs. Her room was simple but clean, with a view of the surrounding mountains through a large window. She unpacked her few belongings, including the civilian clothes she'd bought specifically for this trip. No uniforms, no gear, no reminders of the military life she was temporarily leaving behind. The next morning, Sarah woke early out of habit and decided to explore the town. Pine Ridge was even smaller than it had appeared the night before. The main street consisted of maybe 20 buildings, a diner, a general store, a gas station, a small bank, and various other businesses that served the local population of fewer than 800 people. She stopped at Mountain Brew Coffee, a tiny shop squeezed between a hardware store and a used bookstore. The owner, a woman in her 40s with graying hair pulled back in a ponytail, greeted her warmly. "New face in town," the woman said with a smile. "I'm Rebecca Chun. You're staying at Henry's place." "Sarah Martinez." "Yes, just here for a week to do some hiking and relax." Rebecca nodded approvingly as she prepared Sarah's coffee. "You picked a good time. Weather's been perfect, and most of the summer tourists have cleared out." "Where are you from?" "Colorado Springs area," Sarah replied, keeping her answer vague. She'd learned that mentioning her military service often led to awkward conversations or unwanted attention. As Rebecca handed her the coffee, a loud crash came from outside, followed by angry shouting. Through the window, Sarah could see a young woman, maybe 19 or 20, backing away from 3 men who had clearly cornered her near the alley between 2 buildings. "Oh no," Rebecca muttered, her face darkening. "Not again." Sarah set down her coffee cup. "What's happening?" "That's Emma Reeves. She works at the diner." "Those 3. Rebecca shook her head. "They're the Morrison brothers, local troublemakers. Their family owns a lot of land around here, and they think that gives them the right to do whatever they want." Through the window, Sarah could see that the situation was escalating. The largest of the 3 men, a heavy-set guy with a beard, had grabbed Emma's arm and was pulling her further into the alley. The young woman was struggling and clearly terrified. Sarah was already moving toward the door when Rebecca grabbed her arm. "Wait, you don't understand. The Morrisons, they're dangerous. The sheriff is their cousin, and they've never faced any real consequences for what they do. People have tried to help before, but it just makes things worse for everyone involved." Sarah looked back at Rebecca with an expression that made the coffee shop owner immediately let go of her arm. "I understand perfectly," Sarah said quietly, "but I can't just stand here and watch." She pushed through the door and walked quickly toward the alley. As she got closer, she could hear what the men were saying to Emma, and her jaw tightened. The largest one, who seemed to be the leader, was telling Emma exactly what he planned to do to her, while his 2 brothers blocked any escape route. "Hey," Sarah called out, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of command that had been drilled into her through years of military training. "Let her go." The three men turned to look at her, and she could immediately read the situation. These weren't just local bullies. They were predators who had clearly done this before. The way they moved, the confidence in their posture, the casual way they dismissed her presence. It all told a story she'd seen before in different contexts. The leader, who had to be Jake Morrison based on the family resemblance Rebecca had mentioned, sneered at her. "This ain't your business, sweetheart. Why don't you head back to wherever you came from and mind your own affairs?" Sarah continued walking toward them, her pace steady and her hands relaxed at her sides. "I'm making it my business. Let the girl go, and we can all walk away from this." The middle brother, skinnier than Jake, but with the same cruel eyes, laughed harshly. "Oh, look at this. We got ourselves a hero. You know what, lady? Maybe we'll have some fun with you too when we're done with Emma here." Sarah stopped about 10 feet away from them, close enough to act if needed, but far enough to assess the full situation. Emma was pressed against the brick wall, tears streaming down her face, but trying to stay quiet. Smart girl. She sensed that the wrong word might make everything worse. "Last chance," Sarah said, her voice still calm. "Walk away now." Jake Morrison released Emma's arm and took a step towards Sarah, his massive frame meant to be intimidating. At 6'4" and probably 250 pounds, he was used to people backing down when he made his presence known. His brothers flanked him, clearly expecting this to be over quickly. "You know what your problem is?" Jake said, pointing a thick finger at Sarah. "You don't know your place. Around here, women learn to keep their mouths shut and do what they're told. Maybe it's time someone taught you some manners." Sarah nodded slightly, as if considering his words. "You're probably right," she said. "I definitely need to learn my place." Jake smiled triumphantly and took another step forward, reaching out to grab Sarah's shoulder. He never saw her move. In one fluid motion, Sarah sidestepped his reaching hand, grabbed his wrist, and used his own momentum to send him stumbling past her. As he fought to regain his balance, she delivered a precise kick to the back of his knee that dropped him to the ground. The entire sequence took less than 3 seconds. The two brothers stood frozen for a moment, shocked by how quickly their intimidating older brother had been put down. Jake rolled over and started to get up, his face red with embarrassment and rage. "You stupid," he began, but Sarah cut him off. "Stay down," she said, and something in her tone made all three men pause. "All of you, this is over. The girl is leaving, and so am I. You're going to let us walk away, and you're going to forget this ever happened." The youngest brother, maybe 22 years old, looked between Sarah and his fallen brother with confusion. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Sarah studied him for a moment before answering. "Just someone who doesn't like bullies." Jake Morrison finally made it back to his feet, and Sarah could see the calculation in his eyes. He was weighing his options, trying to decide if his pride was worth the risk of another confrontation with this unexpected opponent. Around them, she could sense that people had started to gather, watching from doorways and windows, but not daring to come closer. "This isn't over," Jake finally said, his voice low and threatening. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, lady. You have no idea who you're messing with." Sarah looked at him steadily. "Actually, I think you're the one who has no idea who you're messing with. But you're about to find out." She turned to Emma, who was still pressed against the wall, but no longer crying. "Are you hurt?" Emma shook her head quickly. "No, I'm okay. Thank you. Thank you so much." "Good. Is there somewhere safe you can go? Family? Friends? My aunt lives across town. I can stay with her." Sarah nodded. "Go there now. Don't come back here alone. And if these three bother you again, you call the police immediately, regardless of who they're related to." As Emma hurried away, Sarah turned back to the Morrison brothers. Jake was standing straighter now, his confidence returning as he remembered that he had backup, and she was alone. The middle brother had pulled out his cell phone and was typing rapidly. "You know what?" Jake said, his smile returning. "I changed my mind. This is going to be fun after all. See, you just assaulted me in front of witnesses. That's going to be a problem for you. A big problem. Sarah realized that the phone call was likely to the sheriff, their cousin who would undoubtedly see things their way regardless of what had actually happened. She also noticed that more people were gathering now, though they still kept their distance. Some looked sympathetic, but others seemed to be enjoying the show, as if violence was a welcome break from the usual routine. I defended someone who was being attacked, Sarah said calmly. I'm pretty sure any reasonable person would call that justified. Jake's laugh was ugly. Reasonable? Lady, you're not from around here, so let me explain how things work. My family has been in this valley for 4 generations. We own half the land, employ half the people, and when something happens, people tend to see things our way. You're just some outsider who stuck her nose where it doesn't belong. The middle brother finished his phone call and grinned. Sheriff's on his way. Should be here in about 10 minutes. Sarah felt a familiar calm settle over her, the same feeling she'd had before difficult missions overseas. The situation was escalating, but she'd been in much worse spots with much higher stakes. The key was to stay alert and not let emotions cloud her judgment. While we're waiting, Jake said, cracking his knuckles, maybe we should have a little conversation about respect. See, I don't think you understand just how much trouble you're in. But don't worry, we're going to teach you. The youngest brother had been quiet up until now, but suddenly he stepped forward with a baseball bat that he'd apparently retrieved from their truck. Maybe we should just handle this ourselves, Jake. Sheriff don't need to be involved if she's already learned her lesson by the time he gets here. Sarah assessed the new threat level. 3 men, one armed with a bat, in a confined space with limited escape routes. The gathering crowd meant civilians who could get hurt if things went badly. She needed to either de-escalate quickly or finish this before it got worse. You really want to do this? She asked, looking directly at Jake. Because once you make that choice, there's no going back. Things are going to get ugly, and somebody's going to get seriously hurt. Are you sure you want to be responsible for that? Jake's response was to signal his brothers. They spread out slightly, trying to surround her in the narrow space between the buildings. Sarah noted their positions and the distance to each potential threat, automatically calculating angles and responses. The only one getting hurt, Jake said, is going to be you. Sarah sighed softly. She had really hoped to avoid this, but some people only understood one language. As Jake took his first step toward her, she decided it was time to give them a lesson they would never forget. The Morrison brothers had no idea that the quiet woman they had decided to intimidate was a decorated Army Ranger with 3 combat tours and advanced training in multiple forms of combat. They were about to learn that picking the wrong target could have consequences they never imagined. The last peaceful moment in Pine Ridge that afternoon ended when Jake Morrison made his move, and what happened next would become a story that people in the town would tell for years to come. Jake Morrison's first mistake was thinking that size alone would give him the advantage. His second mistake was believing that Sarah would be paralyzed by fear when faced with 3 attackers. His third and final mistake was assuming that a woman traveling alone would be an easy target. As Jake lunged forward with his massive hands reaching for Sarah's throat, she moved with the fluid precision of someone who had trained for exactly this kind of situation thousands of times. She ducked under his grasp, pivoted on her right foot, and drove her elbow into his solar plexus with enough force to lift his feet off the ground. Jake's breath exploded from his lungs in a whooshing sound that echoed off the alley walls. He doubled over, gasping like a fish out of water, and Sarah was already moving to address the next threat. The middle brother, Tommy Morrison, was swinging the baseball bat in a wide arc toward her head, but his technique was sloppy and telegraphed. Sarah caught the bat mid-swing with both hands, twisted her body to absorb the momentum, and then yanked it forward while simultaneously stepping into Tommy's space. The sudden reversal of force sent him stumbling toward her, and she met him with a knee strike to his midsection that folded him in half. The bat clattered to the ground as Tommy joined his older brother in trying to remember how to breathe. The youngest Morrison brother, Danny, stood frozen for a crucial second as he watched his supposedly invincible older brothers get dismantled by someone half their size. That hesitation cost him any chance of landing an effective attack. By the time he moved, Sarah had already picked up the dropped baseball bat and was holding it with the casual confidence of someone who knew how to use it. "Walk away," Sarah said again, her breathing still steady despite having just taken down 2 men in as many seconds. "This is your last chance to end this without getting seriously hurt." Danny's face was flushed with embarrassment and anger. Around them, the crowd of onlookers had grown larger, and he could feel their eyes on him. The Morrison family reputation was built on intimidation and the assumption that nobody would dare fight back. Having that image shattered by an outsider, and a woman at that, was unthinkable. "You're dead," Danny snarled, pulling a knife from his belt. "Nobody humiliates my family," and walks away. Sarah saw the blade and felt the situation shift into truly dangerous territory. The knife changed everything. What had been a simple assault was now potentially deadly, and she could no longer afford to hold back. Her military training took over completely, and the woman who had been trying to enjoy a peaceful vacation disappeared, replaced by the combat veteran who had survived 3 tours in one of the world's most dangerous war zones. "Put the knife down," Sarah said, her voice taking on a tone that made several people in the crowd step back instinctively. "You pull that blade on me, and this stops being a fight and becomes something much worse for you." Danny's response was to charge forward with the knife extended, aiming for Sarah's center mass. It was a clumsy, angry attack from someone who had probably never been in a real knife fight in his life. Sarah sidestepped the thrust, grabbed his wrist with her left hand, and brought the baseball bat down across his forearm with precisely controlled force. The crack of breaking bone was audible throughout the alley, followed immediately by Danny's scream as the knife fell from his suddenly useless fingers. Sarah maintained her grip on his wrist and twisted, sending him to his knees in a position where any further movement would cause excruciating pain. "Stay down," she commanded, and Danny Morrison, tears streaming down his face as he cradled his broken arm, had no choice but to comply. Jake and Tommy were starting to recover their breath, but neither seemed eager to continue the fight after watching their youngest brother get his arm snapped like a twig. The crowd was murmuring now, a mix of shock and amazement at what they had just witnessed. Sarah heard the distant sound of a police siren and knew that the sheriff would arrive soon. She needed to control the narrative before Jake Morrison's cousin showed up to take charge of the situation. She pulled out her cell phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? This is Sarah Martinez. I'm in the alley behind Mountain Brew Coffee in Pine Ridge. I was attacked by 3 men with a weapon, and one of them is injured. I need medical attention for a broken arm and potentially serious internal injuries. The dispatcher's voice became more alert. "Ma'am, are you injured?" "No, I defended myself successfully. The attackers are no longer a threat, but they need medical attention." As she ended the call, Sarah noticed that Jake Morrison had managed to sit up against the alley wall. His face was pale, and he was holding his midsection where her elbow had connected. Tommy was still on his hands and knees, occasionally retching, while Danny continued to whimper over his broken arm. "You crazy?" Jake gasped, trying to catch his breath. "You crazy witch. You have no idea what you just did. When my cousin gets here, you're going to prison for assault with a deadly weapon." Sarah looked at the baseball bat in her hand, then at the knife lying near Danny's feet. "Assault with a deadly weapon? I think you're confused about who brought the weapons to this fight." Several people in the crowd started talking at once, and Sarah realized that the narrative Jake was trying to create wasn't going to hold up. Multiple witnesses had seen the Morrison brothers corner Emma, had seen them threaten Sarah, and had watched Danny pull the knife. Whatever influence the family had with local law enforcement, it would be harder to cover up an incident with this many witnesses. Henry Caldwell pushed through the crowd, his face grim with concern. "Miss Martinez, are you all right?" "I'm fine, Mr. Caldwell. But we're going to need to call an ambulance for these 3. Henry looked at the Morrison brothers with an expression of disgust. I saw the whole thing from my front desk. Jake Morrison, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. Going after Emma Reeves like that, and then attacking a guest in my hotel when she tried to help. Shut up, old man, Jake wheezed. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about, Henry replied firmly. And so does everyone else here. We all saw you corner that poor girl, and we all saw you and your brothers attack this young lady when she tried to help. Rebecca Chun had also joined the crowd, carrying a first aid kit from her coffee shop. Emma is safe, she told Sarah quietly. She made it to her aunt's house and called to thank you. The police siren was getting closer now, and Sarah could see a sheriff's patrol car turning on a main street. She made sure the baseball bat was lying on the ground near her feet rather than in her hands, and she positioned herself where the arriving officer would have a clear view of all three Morrison brothers and their respective injuries. Sheriff Bill Morrison looked exactly like what Sarah had expected, a middle-aged man with a beer gut and a mustache, wearing a uniform that had seen better days. He stepped out of his patrol car with the swagger of someone who was used to being the biggest authority figure in a small town, but his confidence seemed to waver slightly when he saw the crowd and the condition of his cousins. What's going on here? He demanded, though his eyes were already focusing on Sarah as the most obvious outsider. Before anyone could answer, Jake Morrison struggled to his feet, still holding his midsection. Bill, thank God you're here. This woman attacked us with a baseball bat. Danny's got a broken arm, and I think she broke some of my ribs. Sheriff Morrison's expression hardened as he looked at Sarah. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to put your hands behind your back. Sheriff Morrison, Henry Caldwell interrupted, stepping forward with more courage than Sarah would have expected from the elderly innkeeper. Before you do anything, you need to hear what actually happened here. I can see what happened, the sheriff replied. 3 injured men and 1 woman with a weapon. The weapon belonged to Danny, Rebecca Chun said firmly. He brought a knife to attack Miss Martinez after she defended Emma Reeves for being assaulted. Several other people in the crowd began speaking up, all confirming the same basic story. The sheriff's face grew increasingly uncomfortable as witness after witness contradicted his cousin's version of events. Sarah remained silent during this exchange, knowing that anything she said at this point might be twisted against her later. She had dealt with corrupt officials before, and she understood that the best strategy was to let the facts speak for themselves while documenting everything that happened. The sound of another siren announced the arrival of the ambulance Sarah had requested. 2 EMTs emerged and quickly assessed the situation, moving immediately to treat Danny's obviously broken arm, while checking the other 2 brothers for internal injuries. Sheriff, one of the EMTs said after examining Jake Morrison, this man has what looks like significant internal bruising. We need to get him to the hospital for x-rays to rule out organ damage. Sheriff Morrison was caught between his family loyalty and the growing pile of evidence that his cousins had been the aggressors in this situation. The presence of so many witnesses, combined with the severity of the injuries, meant that this incident couldn't be swept under the rug the way smaller confrontations might have been in the past. Sarah finally spoke up. Sheriff, I'd like to file a formal complaint against these 3 men for assault, attempted sexual assault of Emma Reeves, and assault with a deadly weapon. I have witnesses who can confirm that they initiated the violence and that I acted purely in self-defense. Now wait just a minute, Sheriff Morrison began, but he was interrupted by the arrival of another vehicle. A state police car pulled up behind the ambulance, and a tall, professional-looking trooper emerged. Sarah felt a moment of relief as she recognized the bearing of someone who would be less likely to be influenced by local politics. Sheriff Morrison, the trooper said, approaching the group. I'm Sergeant Williams. We received a call about a serious assault involving weapons. What's the situation? Sheriff Morrison's discomfort was now obvious to everyone present. The involvement of the state police meant that this incident would be investigated properly, regardless of his family connections. Well, Sergeant, it appears there was an altercation between my cousins and this woman here. Sergeant Williams looked around the scene, taking in the injured men, the witnesses, and Sarah's calm demeanor. I see. And who called it in? I did, Sarah said. I was attacked by 3 men, one of whom was armed with a knife. I defended myself and immediately called for medical assistance. The sergeant nodded and pulled out a notebook. I'll need statements from everyone involved, starting with you, ma'am. But first, can you tell me your name and occupation? Sarah took a deep breath. She had hoped to keep her military background private during her vacation, but the situation had moved beyond the point where that was possible. Sarah Martinez. I'm a staff sergeant in the United States Army, currently on leave. The effect of her words on the crowd was immediate and dramatic. Sheriff Morrison's face went pale as he began to understand the implications of what his cousins had done. Attacking a civilian was bad enough, but attacking an active duty soldier was a matter that would likely draw federal attention. Sergeant Williams made a note in his book and looked at Sarah with new interest. What's your unit, Sergeant Martinez? 75th Ranger Regiment. I'm stationed at Fort Carson. The sergeant's eyebrows rose slightly. Army Rangers had a reputation even among law enforcement officers, and Sarah could see him reassessing the entire situation based on this new information. The idea that 3 local troublemakers had picked a fight with a combat-trained soldier suddenly made the outcome of the confrontation much more understandable. Jake Morrison, who had been listening to this exchange from his position against the alley wall, looked like he might be sick. The realization that he had attacked a member of one of the military's most elite units was clearly not sitting well with him. Sergeant Martinez, Sergeant Williams continued, I'll need a detailed statement about what happened here, but based on what I'm seeing and hearing, it sounds like you acted in legitimate self-defense. Sheriff Morrison made one last attempt to protect his family. Now, Sergeant Williams, you don't understand the whole situation. These are good local boys who might have just been having a misunderstanding with this young lady. The state trooper turned to look at Sheriff Morrison with an expression that could have frozen water. Sheriff, are you suggesting that 3 men cornering and threatening a female soldier constitutes a misunderstanding? Before Sheriff Morrison could dig himself any deeper, Rebecca Chun stepped forward with her cell phone in hand. Actually, Sergeant Williams, I have video of part of what happened. I started recording when I saw the situation developing. Sarah hadn't noticed Rebecca filming, but she felt another surge of relief at this news. Video evidence would make it much harder for anyone to distort what had actually occurred. As the EMTs finished loading the Morrison brothers into the ambulance, Sarah realized that her quiet vacation had just taken a very dramatic turn. The next few hours would involve statements, paperwork, and probably phone calls to her commanding officer. But as she watched Emma Reeves arrive with her aunt to give her own statement to Sergeant Williams, Sarah felt no regret about her actions. Sometimes the right thing to do wasn't the easy thing to do, and sometimes a peaceful vacation had to be interrupted to remind people that there were still those who wouldn't stand by and watch the innocent be victimized. The aftermath was just beginning, but Sarah Martinez had already proven a point that would resonate through Pine Ridge for years to come. Picking the wrong target could have consequences that no amount of local influence could protect you from. The Pine Ridge Police Station had never seen anything quite like the events that unfolded over the following hours. Sergeant Williams had taken charge of the investigation, much to Sheriff Morrison's obvious displeasure, and the small building buzzed with activity as statements were taken and evidence was collected. Sarah sat in a surprisingly comfortable chair in the station's main office, finishing her detailed written statement while Sergeant Williams reviewed the video that Rebecca Chun had captured on her phone. The footage clearly showed the Morrison brothers cornering Emma, Sarah's attempts to de-escalate the situation, and Danny Morrison pulling his knife before the confrontation turned physical. This is pretty cut and dried, Sergeant Williams said, closing his notebook. You've got multiple witnesses, video evidence, and a clear case of self-defense against armed attackers. The district attorney is going to love this one. Sarah looked up from her paperwork. What happens to them now? Well, Jake and Tommy Morrison are being treated at the regional hospital for their injuries. Danny's broken arm was set about an hour ago. Once they're medically cleared, They'll all be facing charges for assault, conspiracy to commit sexual assault, and assault with a deadly weapon. Danny gets the extra charge for pulling the knife. Sheriff Morrison, who had been conspicuously quiet since the state police took over, finally spoke up from his desk across the room. "Sergeant Williams, surely we can work something out here. These boys have never been in serious trouble before." Sergeant Williams turned to look at him with an expression of barely controlled disgust. "Sheriff, I've spent the last 2 hours talking to people in this town, and I've heard stories about the Morrison brothers that go back years. The only reason they haven't been in serious trouble is because nobody has been willing or able to hold them accountable." Henry Caldwell, who had insisted on staying to provide moral support to Sarah, nodded grimly. "The sergeant is right. Those 3 have been terrorizing people in this town for a long time. Emma Reeves isn't the first girl they've cornered, just the first one who had someone willing to step in and help her." Sarah finished signing her statement and handed it to Sergeant Williams. "What about Emma? Is she going to be safe now?" "That's another thing," the sergeant replied. "I've talked to 5 different women in town who have had similar encounters with the Morrison brothers over the past 2 years. Emma was brave enough to give a full statement, and so did 3 of the others. Between their testimony and what happened today, these 3 are going to be facing some very serious consequences." The station door opened, and a man in an expensive-looking suit walked in, followed by an older woman who bore a strong resemblance to the Morrison brothers. Sarah didn't need to be told that this was probably their lawyer and mother. "Where are my boys?" the woman demanded, her voice carrying the same arrogant tone that Sarah had heard from her sons. "I want to see them immediately." "Mrs. Morrison," Sergeant Williams said politely but firmly, "your sons are at the hospital receiving medical treatment for injuries they sustained while committing multiple felonies. You can see them once they're processed and booked." The lawyer, a thin man with gray hair and cold eyes, surveyed the scene and immediately focused on Sarah. "I assume this is the individual responsible for attacking my clients." Sarah started to respond, but Sergeant Williams held up a hand. "Your clients attacked Sergeant Martinez here after she intervened to prevent them from sexually assaulting a young woman. They were armed with a knife and a baseball bat. Sergeant Martinez defended herself using appropriate force." "Sergeant," the lawyer's confidence seemed to waver slightly. "Military, Army Rangers," Henry Caldwell said with obvious satisfaction. "Your clients picked a fight with one of the most elite soldiers in the American military." Mrs. Morrison's face was turning an interesting shade of red. "I don't care if she's a general. Nobody has the right to hurt my boys like that." Sarah finally stood up, and there was something about her posture that made both the lawyer and Mrs. Morrison take an unconscious step backward. "Ma'am, your sons cornered a 19-year-old girl in an alley and were planning to assault her. When I tried to stop them, they attacked me with weapons. I used the minimum force necessary to protect myself and the victim. If you want to be angry at someone, be angry at whoever raised your sons to think that behavior was acceptable." The lawyer cleared his throat nervously. "Now, let's not escalate this situation any further. I'm sure we can reach some kind of arrangement that benefits everyone involved." Sergeant Williams laughed humorlessly. "Counselor, your clients are facing multiple felony charges with multiple witnesses, video evidence, and a victim who was recorded defending herself against armed attackers. What kind of arrangement did you have in mind?" Before the lawyer could respond, the station door opened again, and this time 2 people in military uniforms entered. Sarah recognized them immediately. Colonel Jennifer Hayes, her commanding officer from Fort Carson, and Master Sergeant Robert Kim, her direct supervisor. "Sergeant Martinez," Colonel Hayes said, approaching with a slight smile. "When we heard that one of our rangers was involved in a civilian law enforcement situation, we thought we should come see what happened." Sarah came to attention automatically. "Colonel Hayes, Master Sergeant Kim, I apologize for the disruption to my leave time." Colonel Hayes waved dismissively. "At ease, Sergeant. From what we've been told by Sergeant Williams here, you handled yourself exactly as we would expect from a ranger. You protected a civilian, neutralized multiple threats, and followed proper procedures for reporting the incident. Mrs. Morrison had been listening to this exchange with growing alarm. "Wait, are you saying more soldiers are getting involved in this?" Master Sergeant Kim turned to look at her with the flat, professional stare that he usually reserved for new recruits who had done something particularly stupid. "Ma'am, when civilian criminals attack one of our soldiers, especially one of our rangers, we take that very seriously. The Army has a vested interest in ensuring that Sergeant Martinez faces no inappropriate retaliation for defending herself and a civilian victim." The lawyer was clearly beginning to understand that the situation had moved far beyond what local influence could handle. "Perhaps we should discuss a plea arrangement with the district attorney." Sergeant Williams nodded approvingly. "That would probably be wise. The charges your clients are facing carry significant prison time, especially with the weapons enhancements and the pattern of similar behavior that we've uncovered." Colonel Hayes turned to Sarah. "Sergeant, we've spoken with the district attorney and the state police. Your actions were completely justified, and there will be no negative impact on your military record. In fact, this incident is going to be noted as a commendation for courage and protection of civilians." Sarah felt a wave of relief, though she tried not to show it. The possibility of military discipline for the incident had been weighing on her mind, even though she knew she had acted correctly. "Thank you, Colonel. Will I be able to complete my leave time?" "Absolutely, though you might find that your remaining time in Pine Ridge is a bit different than what you originally planned." This proved to be an understatement. Over the next few days, Sarah discovered that her actions had fundamentally changed the dynamic of the small mountain town. The Morrison family's grip on local affairs had been broken, not just by the criminal charges against the three brothers, but by the public nature of their defeat. Emma Reeves stopped by the inn on Sarah's third day to personally thank her again. The young woman looked different, more confident, with her head held higher and a smile that seemed more genuine. "I wanted you to know," Emma said as they sat on the inn's front porch, "that 3 other women have come forward to press charges against the Morrison brothers for things they did to them. None of us thought anyone would believe us before, but after what happened with you, people are finally listening." Sarah nodded, pleased to hear that the incident was having broader positive effects. "That's brave of all of you. It takes courage to speak up." "Not as much courage as it took for you to step in when they were attacking me," Emma replied. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't been there." Rebecca Chun had also become a regular visitor, often bringing coffee and pastries from her shop while she filled Sarah in on the town gossip. The video she had taken of the incident had somehow found its way onto social media, where it had gone viral under the hashtag Don't Mess With Rangers. "You've become something of a folk hero," Rebecca told her on the 4th day. "People are driving in from 3 counties away just to see the place where an Army Ranger took down 3 attackers with a baseball bat." Henry Caldwell was perhaps the most pleased by the turn of events. The elderly innkeeper had revealed that he was indeed a military veteran, a Marine who had served in Vietnam, and he took obvious pride in having Sarah as a guest. "In 40 years of running this place," he told her over breakfast on her 5th day, "I've never been prouder to host anyone. You did something that needed doing, and you did it the right way." The Morrison brothers had all been released from the hospital and formally charged. Jake and Tommy had posted bail and were awaiting trial, while Danny remained in custody due to the weapons charge and his history of failing to appear in court. Their lawyer had indeed approached the district attorney about a plea arrangement, but the state was not particularly interested in reducing the charges. Sheriff Morrison had been placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation into his handling of previous complaints against his cousins. The state police had found evidence that multiple reports against the Morrison brothers had been filed, but never properly investigated. On Sarah's final morning in Pine Ridge, she was surprised to receive a visit from the mayor, a nervous-looking man named Robert Fletcher, who had apparently been waiting for the situation to settle before approaching her. "Miss Martinez, Sergeant Martinez," he began awkwardly, "I wanted to thank you personally for what you did. Those boys have been causing problems for years, and, frankly, a lot of us were afraid to do anything about it." Sarah accepted his thanks politely, though she couldn't help but feel disappointed by the admission that the town's leadership had known about the problem and chosen to ignore it. I also wanted to ask, Mayor Fletcher continued, if you might consider making Pine Ridge a regular vacation destination. The town council voted unanimously to offer you a permanent discount at any local business, and Henry has already said you'll always have a room at the inn whenever you want it. Sarah considered the offer. The town had grown on her, despite the dramatic circumstances of her visit. The mountains were beautiful, the people were generally friendly, and there was something appealing about the idea of having a regular retreat where she was welcomed and appreciated. I'll think about it, she said finally. Pine Ridge is a beautiful place. With the right kind of leadership, it could be something really special. The mayor seemed to understand the implicit message in her words. We're working on making some changes. The town deserves better than what we've allowed to happen. As Sarah loaded her truck for the drive back to Fort Carson, she reflected on the week that had started as a simple vacation and turned into something much more significant. She had come to Pine Ridge looking for peace and quiet, but instead had found herself in the middle of a situation that had required her to use skills she had hoped to leave behind temporarily. But as she thought about Emma Reeves walking with her head held high, about the other women who had found the courage to speak up, and about a small town that was finally confronting its problems instead of ignoring them, Sarah felt that her interrupted vacation had been time well spent. Henry Caldwell came out to see her off, and as she shook his weathered hand one last time, he smiled broadly. You take care of yourself out there, Sergeant. And remember, you've got a home here whenever you need one. As Sarah drove away from Pine Ridge, she could see the mountains in her rearview mirror and the town spread out in the valley below. It looked peaceful now, but she knew that the real peace would come from the changes that were already beginning to take place. The Morrison brothers had learned that attacking the wrong person could have consequences that no amount of local influence could protect them from. More importantly, the people of Pine Ridge had learned that sometimes one person willing to stand up and do the right thing could make a difference for everyone. Sarah Martinez had come to Pine Ridge looking for a quiet vacation. Instead, she had reminded an entire community what courage looked like, and in doing so, she had made the world a little bit safer for people like Emma Reeves who just wanted to live their lives without fear. The mountains were calling, and she knew she would answer again. But next time, she hoped it would just be for the hiking.